pleased to be here. Very few things that I like better than being in a room full of awesome women. And I'm going to be talking to you about boundaries. And boundaries are one of my favorite topics because it's such a rich topic. You can learn so much about yourself, about others, about humanity by talking about and experiencing boundaries. So let's get clear on exactly what boundaries are. Does anybody have any ideas? Yes?
It's what defines me as a human being with emotions and a human experience.
What defines me as a human being with emotions and experience. Okay, as different from other human beings. It delineates you.
Where my edges are, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually.
Yeah, where your edges are. That's awesome, Amanda. Thank you. Jamie?
It's the line between me and you.
The line between me and you. Yeah. Yes?
I would say it's self-care, self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Self-care and self-love. Excellent. That goes right into the rest of my talk. Thank you. Does anybody else have any? Oh, yes.
It delineates what I want in my life and what I don't want in my life.
What I want and what I don't want. Excellent. Yes, those are all great. So I like to also define a boundary as a limit or a preference. Again, between something I want and something I don't want, between me and you. So that's kind of what we're working with when we're talking about boundaries. So my guess is that when you meet somebody who has good boundaries, you know. Those are the people who are saying please and thank you and can I hug you? And the people who don't have such great boundaries are the ones that are just hugging you whether you like it or not, or they're bumping into you and they don't seem to realize it, or they keep asking you to do things and they don't really hear you say no. And what is it that, yeah, seriously. So what is it that makes some people one way and some people the other? The answer is in our childhoods. If you grew up in a family where people said please and thank you, where you were taught to knock on somebody's bedroom door instead of walking right in, those are generally people with good boundaries. And in some families, the parents are tired, they're busy, they're distracted. Maybe they don't have good boundaries themselves. And so people from those families don't generally learn good boundaries. And the world is full of all of it. So you are going to run into people who have good boundaries and people whose boundaries are not so great. So, how do you know when a boundary has been, how do you know when you've crossed a boundary of someone else's?
By their reaction.
By their reaction, okay. And so when they react, what do? What do they say?
They could physically take a step back, or.
Yep, they could take a step back. They might, yeah, hands up. They might give you a verbal reaction. They might freeze. Like, have you ever hugged somebody who didn't want to be hugged? They just kind of stand there, and you're like, ooh, thanks. What did I do? So when you've crossed somebody's boundary and you notice, what I found is the best thing to do is acknowledge it right as soon as you notice. I'm sorry, did that make you uncomfortable? And just acknowledge it, apologize, take responsibility for your behavior, and say, you know what, I didn't realize that made you uncomfortable. I'm really sorry. I'm going to do my best not to do that again. And sometimes you don't notice until later. Like maybe you have some weird interaction with a friend, and then you don't notice until a couple days later, you know, that was kind of weird. And so as soon as you notice, shoot them an email, shoot them a text, and say, hey, was that weird or was that just me? And you want to check in because you want to make sure that they feel respected. And you want to make sure that connection can be present between you. Because when there's a boundary violation, that's lack of connection. So what do you do when somebody violates one of your boundaries? Like, where does your brain go immediately? On the defensive, yes. Good answers over here. Yeah. You know, you freeze. Your hands go up. Your emotional and psychic defenses go up. So the thing to do when that happens is remember to breathe and remember that you're at choice as to how you respond. Because once you've experienced a boundary violation, whether it's physical, whether it's verbal, where your brain goes is into what I like to call your lizard brain. It's not your conscious brain thinking. It's just your lizard brain, and it's going to do one of three things: fight, flight, or freeze. So you want to remember that you're a choice. And like Denise was saying, grace. So you can choose how you react. So you might choose to step away from the person. Like if you're at a club and somebody's like bumping into you and they're clearly drunk, and if you choose not to confront them, that's fine. But just remember that you're a choice. You're choosing not to do anything about it in that moment. Or you might choose to say, excuse me, I'm here. And the key to expressing your boundaries and saying no with an open heart is to remember that you're a choice, and that how you deal with this is going to create more respect and more love and more connection between you and the other person, ideally. Now, it doesn't always go that way. I mean, I have an unusual name. It's spelled in an unusual way, and people often don't know how to pronounce it. So lots of times I'll meet somebody and I'll say, hi, my name's Karin. And they'll say, hey, Karin, nice to meet you. And I'll say, that's not my name. My name is Karin. They'll be, well, don't get so upset about it. And I wasn't upset. People have reactions to being told that they've violated a boundary, that they're not treating you the way that you want to be treated. So the thing about the way people treat you is that by the way you act and what you tolerate and what you don't, you train people how to treat you. And the really good news about that is that anytime you want to change that, you can. You can change it by recognizing what you want and what you don't want, especially if it's changed. Like, oh, I used to really like hugs, and now, not so much. That's okay. You can train people. And the way that you do that is remembering that you're a choice, and remembering to just be open and gracious when you speak your preferences. And they might have a response to that that's like, whoa, okay. Or they might be like, oh yeah, thanks for telling me. That's great. So we're going to do an exercise now. And I want everybody to find a partner. As women in this culture, we're not often taught how to say a clear no. I wasn't. I had to learn that on my own. That was kind of tough. So as women in this culture, we're not often taught to say a clear no. So what we're going to do now is we're going to practice doing that. So think of something that if somebody asked you to do it, you would say no. Just have it in your head. Everybody have something?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Something that you would say no to if somebody asked you.
That I already can easily say no to, or something that I would want to say no to, but am wanting some empowerment around saying no to.
The more challenging, the better.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Like the more challenging it is to say no to, like maybe there's a lot of charge around it, maybe you've said yes to it in the past, but you really meant no. Have that in your mind. And now turn to your partner. This is going to require some trust. Turn to your partner and let her know what that is. Anyone else? Yes.
It was really hard to just say no without saying something about why.
Isn't it though? No, because, no thank you, no, and, yeah, no but.
Whatever, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
I noticed that I physically kind of shrunk away when I was like, no, like I was almost afraid of the response.
Yeah.
And I do that. It shows up in a lot of different ways, so.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything else you can say besides please respect my boundaries? Because for some reason that feels aggressive to me.
And what feels aggressive about that to you?
Well, like for instance, the conversation I was having is with a girlfriend who actually is a therapist.
Uh-huh.
So if I said to her, please respect my boundaries, it would be like, what?
Ah, interesting. Okay.
So
Yes, of course you can say.
to use besides boundaries.
Yeah, you can absolutely say other things. That was just for the purpose of the exercise.
Okay.
But, you know, obviously, with the person that you're speaking to, you would want to make sure to speak it in the language that they understand. And if it's a person you know well, then that makes it different.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you would never want to tell a therapist to respect your boundaries. Right. Still. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
Well, I thought it was interesting how it brought up the awareness of all of the reasons why I find it hard to say no. And one of the biggest ones is wanting to be liked, not wanting to be rejected, wanting to be the good, giving, generous person,
Yeah.
and also feeling responsible for their reaction, which is kind of actually a very manipulative way of being in relationship, of being like, well, I'm going to respond to you in a way that's going to elicit the response that I want, which is not someone to be like, because obviously when you start saying your boundaries, there are people who get pissed off, and
Yes.
and it's hard sometimes to take that. So
Right.
yeah, so that's what it all kind of came into my awareness of like, oh yeah, this is why this is hard.
That is why it's hard.
Yeah.
So, even if it is hard, just remember the key to really remembering how to speak your boundaries is that you're worth it. You are loved. You deserve to take up space. That's the key. That, and you are at choice for this. So ideally, it doesn't always go this way, and that's the other thing. If you have a conversation about boundaries or an exchange about boundaries that goes badly, don't lose heart. Remember to keep trying, keep expressing your boundaries. It will change some of your relationships. Maybe not the random guy on the street who bumped into you, but who knows? If we all express our boundaries and everyone starts doing it, this will be a better world to be in.
Yeah.
For real. So, ideally, when you express your boundaries, what you end up with is more love and more respect. You have more love for yourself. You have more respect between you and the other person. The other person has more respect for you. And here's a little tip. If you're not feeling particularly self-loving in the moment and you really need to communicate a boundary, fake it till you make it. Okay? Even if you're not thinking, I'm particularly worthy, just pretend you are. It'll work out, I promise. So the last thing I want to leave you with is a definition of love. So I said, love can be present, respect can be present. A definition of love that I read about recently that just absolutely blew my mind. We have a lot of ideas about love in this culture, that it only happens once, that it takes a whole lifetime, that it only happens with certain people. There's a woman named Barbara Fredrickson. She's a professor at the University of North Carolina. Her field is positive psychology. And she wrote this book recently called Love 2.0, and her definition of love is a micro moment of positivity resonance. Now let me break that down for you. It could happen when you're going to get your mail and you run into your neighbor at the mailbox and you get into this really animated chat about like, oh, you have a dog? I have a dog too. Yeah, we should totally go for our dog walks together. If you have a moment with somebody where you're in sync with them and you feel like there's a mutual bond, that's love. You can call that love. You can have it anytime, anywhere, with anyone. Thank you so much. Go forth and light up the world.